Hello, this is Carol Head. I'm the president of the Solve ME CFS Initiative. Welcome to our Advocacy Week training. We are very excited about having pulled together, I think, a bigger, bolder, stronger advocacy this year than we have ever done before. The training really is quite important. The difference between really having effective meetings with the congressionals and their staffers and having meetings in which less genuine interaction occurs is significant. So we are very fortunate to have Emily Taylor on our staff, who has deep experience in Capitol Hill advocacy, and so she will be providing tips and instructions on how to really make each of those precious meetings, which typically are only 20 minutes, as powerful and effective and rewarding for all of us who will be there as possible. So Emily, thank you for leading this training for us, and take it away.
Oh, thank you, Carol. Thank you so much for that kind introduction, and welcome everyone. I'm really glad to be here. I hope you're glad to be here too. So today we're going to be looking at some basic tips and tricks for your meetings on Capitol Hill as part of our ME CFS Advocacy Day. And before we begin, just really quickly, I was wondering how many of you are going to be joining us in Washington, D.C., so I can kind of tailor our presentation to who's joining us today. So I'm going to launch a quick poll just to get a sense of who's in the audience here. So everyone can just click yes or no if you're going to be with us in Washington, D.C. on Tuesday, May 15th or not. I'm seeing the results coming in. Got 75% voted. Thank you everyone for taking this moment just so I know who's going to be here, and then we can tailor our presentation to what you would like to hear. Awesome. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll. Excellent. So thank you, everybody. It looks like 77% of everybody who's on the webinar today is going to be with us in Washington, D.C., and 23% are going to be our local advocates working in their own districts. So I'll focus a bit more, because we have more folks here in Washington, D.C. on the D.C. area, but then I'll also include some of these tips and tricks for the local folks as well for doing local meetings. So just a little overview of what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to look at ME CFS Advocacy Week in a big way, our big targets, our strategy, our asks for the week. And then I'm going to focus a little more on meetings. This is just going to be a broad overview. These can be applied both in DC and in your home district. And from there, I'm going to go a little bit into more detail about what to expect in DC and what you can experience, some help to navigate Capitol Hill, and hopefully get you ready and comfortable for hitting the road with us on Tuesday, May 15th. So we'll just dig right in. So what are our targets for ME CFS Advocacy Week? So ME CFS Advocacy Week is a United States-based action. It's focused in the continental, or not just the continental, but in the government of the United States. It's a nationwide effort, and we're specifically focusing on Congress. Congress, both the House and the Senate, and the committee staff, who I think sometimes slip through the cracks, but are incredibly influential in making a lot of these decisions. So just a note that the congressional meetings that we request are actually driven by constituent attendance. So this is something that's come up a lot as a question. So they ask, who are we requesting meetings with? Well, we're requesting meetings with your members of Congress. So if you've signed up to attend, that gets you into our system, and from there we pull apart your House information, your Senate information, who represents you, and then we schedule your meetings accordingly. And then we group people up both on geography. All of our groups, we keep a couple key points in mind. For people who need assistance, we try to pair them with a healthy volunteer who can help them get around. For people who are inexperienced, we try to pair them with an experienced advocate to make them feel more comfortable in the meetings. And then we also look at the number of steps. And so we try to pair groups based on whose congressional offices are close to each other, so that you're not walking from a million different buildings. We do our best. We know that our system isn't perfect, because sometimes there's just the certain way the congressional schedules work out, we can't get you as close as possible. But those are our priorities when we make our groupings and then when we make our requests. So that's what you can kind of expect, and what we're doing on our end to make the experience as easy as possible for you. So in terms of ME/CFS Advocacy Week, the big picture strategy, what are we trying to accomplish at the highest levels? So one of the key purposes is to solidify our funding requests in March. If you follow SMCI through our social media channels, or if you read our news publications, you'll know that we did a big push in March with members of our board. We went and had about 25, 30 meetings in Washington, D.C., and those were 2 points that we were really pushing towards. One was we were trying to get funding through the Department of Defense congressionally directed medical research program, and 2, we were trying to solidify what appropriations funding we already have, which is primarily through the CDC. So, so these follow-up meetings, one of their purposes is to remind the congressional offices that were there and to solidify those funding requests from March. The second kind of big picture strategy point of ME/CFS Advocacy Week, and this is what Hill Days are so successful in doing, is creating momentum and buzz for ME/CFS. We want people to be aware that ME/CFS is a important issue. We don't want it to fall through the cracks, and we can do that by keeping the attention and the spotlight on ME/CFS, and Hill Days are a great way to do that. The third kind of point of ME/CFS Advocacy Week is to educate legislators and their staff on ME/CFS. This is actually what used to be our first priority, but it's been falling down the list. When I first did my first ME/CFS meeting in Washington, D.C., I just kind of got a lot of blank stares. Most folks had no idea what I was talking about. They hadn't heard of ME/CFS. And in the 2 years since we've been really pushing advocacy here at SMCI, I've watched that change, where I've taken meetings and now people are like, oh yes, I know exactly who you are and what you're doing. Let's get into the details, which is great, because that way we can start building these relationships and make sure that they're not working on, as we know, a lot of misinformation about ME/CFS out in the world. So that's our third goal. Fourth is to build relationships for future actions. This is also really helpful, and why ME/CFS Advocacy Day is so strong. When the staffers meet with a constituent directly, it builds that relationship, and then other organizations or other issues can come up and they still have that solidified in their mind of that this is something that matters to a constituent or a bunch of constituents in my district. And so those relationships and building that personal connection with the members and their staff is really valuable, and that's what we leverage. We consider it quote unquote political capital as we move forward. So how much political capital do we have with, Representative Smith's office? And depending on the number of meetings he's had with the number of constituents, that's kind of how we would judge our political capital with that office. And of course, last and then definitely not least, is securing support for what we're asking for in this cycle of ME/CFS Advocacy Day. And speaking of what we're asking for, here's a quick summary of our asks, quote unquote asks, or what we're trying to accomplish at ME/CFS Advocacy Week this year. So we do have separate requests for the House and the Senate, and this is something to keep in mind. So kind of be aware of which office you're in, and then kind of focus on which ask, depending on if you're in the House office or the Senate office. In the Senate office, we're specifically, and we're really excited to share this. And so before I go into this in detail, I just have to say a big props and high fives out there virtually to our ME Action friends, specifically Sonia, and our Mass CFEDS friends, Rivka, because they've been working together, all three of us, and also Gail Cooper from ME Action, have been really working on the Senate resolution for like 2 years now. It was one of the first things that we tackled when I came on board, and it was the brainchild of Sonia, and we've actually gotten traction, and it's coming to fruition. So this is so amazing. 2 years of work finally paying off, where we're seeing an ME/CFS resolution hitting potentially the floor of the Senate. And so this is, it's modeled off of a resolution that was passed for multiple sclerosis, and it's being sponsored by Senator Markey. And so we're asking all of our Senate friends to co-sponsor and support the Senate resolution. And we'll have, in your packets will be the text of the resolution and exactly how they can sign on. So that's the first ask on our Senate side. On the House side, we're asking our House friends to send a letter requesting a hearing in the Health Subcommittee on ME/CFS. This is really important because we want to see a hearing for ME/CFS. We haven't had a hearing on Capitol Hill for ME/CFS since about 2005, so it's been over a decade. And hearings are the mechanisms in Congress by which legislation comes to be, by which information is shared in a formal way. And so this is very important for visibility, B, it's the first step on the path towards standalone legislation for ME/CFS, and C, it's also a way for us to really hold specifically the NIH, but also other government agencies' feet to the fire, where they have to sit in front of Congress and answer questions about what they're doing and how they're doing it. And it gives a really open forum to create that pressure to make them do better. So it's a threefold success tactic that we're really excited to do. And the first thing we need is our House friends to write a letter to the committee requesting that. We have a couple other requests that are floating in the air, but aren't solidified enough that I can share them with you today. But again, we'll have a training in person on Capitol Hill the evening before on Monday, May 14th at the hotel, which is the Hyatt Place Capitol. And all of those will be locked in by then, and I can share more details at that point. But those are the two main asks that we're looking to accomplish this trip. So here's a little bit about the next piece was information that's available to help you kind of get comfortable and prepare for ME/CFS Advocacy Week. There's a hyperlink down there to our website where all of this information is housed. Any of the advocacy links on our solvecfs.org website will bring you to this page. So anything that looks like a little megaphone or looks like a little community, those little advocacy icons, those will all bring you to this page, which has all of this information. The information that's kind of currently available that will help walk you through a lot of this is we have a sample schedule available, so you can kind of see what will be expected of you, a full schedule of events, which will also go over here, and FAQs for frequently asked questions that as I've been getting questions from patients or from caregivers or from advocates, I've been just adding them on to the website so that everybody can see what kind of common questions are being asked. What's going to be added hopefully soon, the items that are going to be in your packet, which we will provide for you when you go to your meetings, will also be available for download on the website if you want to look at them prior to your meetings and kind of get a feel, get comfortable with them. Also, hopefully by early next week, fingers crossed, I'll have the local action toolkit completed, and I will share that with you also on the website. We'll also have a full link there for social media actions. And here I'll note that we're actually linking arms and joining hand in hand on social media with ME Action and the Millions Missing effort, which is happening immediately prior to our Hill Day. So there will be social media support for both of those items, so you can kind of share both and get both going simultaneously. There will also be a link to the recording of this webinar so that you can rewatch it again if you missed anything. And again, if there's any questions you have, I'm always available by email as well. So moving on from there, we're just going to go into a quick overview of some of the best practices to help you prepare for your meetings. At this point, since we're about 2.5 weeks out from ME/CFS Advocacy Day, I would focus on numbers 1 and 2. Those are kind of the important ones. And then as we get closer, you can get into more of the 3 through 7 items. But number 1, I think, is definitely, it's number 1 because I think it's most important, is think about how you will tell your story. Your story is the most important tool you have. I mean, your story carries so much power. And I think, so personally, when I tell my story, I really focus on kind of the impact that it's had, this disease, ME/CFS, has had on not just my mom, who's a patient, but on our whole family. And I talk about how, you know, my dad had to change his life, and my brother had to change his life, and I had to change my life. And that's really impactful to show how devastating this disease can be, but in a very human way. So when you think about how to tell your story, also keep in mind that it has to be very brief, which is very frustrating sometimes, because I know there's so much we have to share, but we got to pull it into that 3-minute elevator speech, because that's about all the time you'll have. So this is the area I'd recommend you focus in the coming weeks, is start thinking about what parts of your story really tie into our requests, tie into motivating folks, and how can you share them in a brief way that's emotional and yet honest and yet, you know, and yet moving to the people who are going to be hearing that. So some of the other items, you know, do your research. A lot of that we've done for you, so it'll be available in your packets. But if you want to go do your own research about what ME/CFS programs are in your district, maybe do you have a support group in your area, something that you might want to share to connect it a little more concretely to the people you'll be speaking to, that's great. Review your leave behinds. This will also be, again, the leave behinds are what we call the packet. It'll be in a nice little folder for you. It'll include all the information that we'll also have on the website. So as we get those uploaded, you just want, if you want to read them, get familiar with them so that you know what information we're sharing. Check your facts. Again, SMCI has done most of this for you, but if you want to share something more specific to your district, just double check that it's accurate before you share it. Practice your presentation. This is, most of us, I think the vast majority of folks are really nervous about public speaking, especially to strangers, and you're sharing, personal stories. So it can be a bit intimidating. So sometimes practicing talking to yourself in the mirror, even just reviewing with your loved ones who are traveling with you. This is what I'm going to say. How does that sound? Just kind of walking through it will make you feel more comfortable in the moment. And of course, if you have business cards or some other like contact card, definitely bring them with you. That's sort of a very common practice in these meetings, is to exchange business cards. And then they enter that in to be associated with your meeting. So in the future, fast forward, they'll go back to their notes and they're like, oh yeah, we met with that constituent, and they'll call upon you for maybe some information or somehow other ways to connect with you. So it's always great to leave your contact information. Business cards are kind of the standard way to go. If not, you don't have business cards, that's fine. I just make sure you're ready to kind of share that. Great, so moving on from there, I kind of went big picture to small picture here. So MACFS Advocacy Week meetings. What is the meeting strategy? Why are we having these meetings? So as kind of talked about the big level picture, why overall we're doing MACFS Advocacy Day, but in a small picture way, what are you trying to get out of your specific meeting with your member of Congress? So again, number one is to educate. Hopefully your member of Congress will already be educated at this point, but sometimes they're still not. So sharing your story, talking about the disease, reviewing the facts and reality of the disease, that's really important. Number two, build relationships. We want to, these meetings are really, they're kind of, as I jokingly refer to in my other presentation, they're kind of like first dates. We're trying to court this member of Congress to be a supporter of ours in the long term, in the future. So we want to demonstrate to them that we're good partners, we're good to work with, we have good information, so they feel comfortable continuing to work with us in the future. And of course, third, but definitely not least, secure support for the actions that we talked about before, the asks. So for the senators, we want to be really clear, please, 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 sign on and join Senator Markey in supporting this resolution. And for the House folks, please, please, please write this letter to the Health Subcommittee. We need a hearing. So we want to emphasize how important those asks are, and yet still recognize that it's part of a broader strategy to continue working with these folks in the future. So while you're in your meeting, during your meeting, here's some best practices I'd like to share that I find helpful that when I do congressional meetings, and you're welcome to take these or leave these as you feel comfortable. Number one, take notes. I know this is really challenging, but this is why we put folks together in groups of about 3 to 4. Hopefully no more than 5, but that's like the ideal group number. And so within your group, you might want to identify one person who will kind of be responsible for taking notes, or maybe take notes while your partners are talking, so that together you have a complete record of what happened. This is really valuable, especially for follow-up. I've always found my notes, especially when you're doing a bunch of conversations in one day, they start blurring together, especially with brain fog. And you're like, who did I meet with in the morning, and who was that person 3 hours later? And so taking notes can really help get us the information here at SMCI to take advantage of these partnerships that you're building, and also just keep it for your own records of, when you want to follow up later, who did I meet with at what point, and did we talk about who did I make that joke with? That's kind of a helpful thing to have. Number 2 is to be positive. Don't make assumptions or accusations. So believe it or not, there are Republicans who work in Democratic offices and Democrats who work in Republican offices. So don't necessarily make an assumption about the understanding or political stance of the person you're speaking with. And also, you have to recognize that these folks, they work in a particular capacity for a member of Congress. And so when you start saying things like, this government doesn't appreciate us, or, it kind of puts them on the defensive. You don't want to, the NIH is not necessarily the same as the congressional office you're speaking to. And so while you're saying, yes, the NIH has fallen short, you don't want to say you did it. You want to say the NIH did it. So don't make it like an attacking kind of position. Always put things in a positive light. It's more likely to build a positive relationship with that staffer or that member of Congress to want to work with us in the future. Number 3, listen, don't interrupt. It's sort of it seems sort of basic, but sometimes, especially when you're working with folks who are not familiar with the disease, and they'll say those trigger things like, I'm tired too, and it makes you want to scream. You got to kind of rein it in, be calm, and then correct them. Number 4, correct them with kindness. It's really difficult, and I've been there where people are like, oh, well, why didn't your mom just try more vitamins? And I'm like, it's not that simple. This is a complex systemic disease, and you try to explain that to them in a positive way. You don't want to, so if someone says, for example, the classic, I'm tired too, I'm sorry to hear that you're tired, but I'm really sick. I'm not just tired. That's kind of an example of how to correct with kindness, because some of these folks are genuinely in the dark when it comes to ME/CFS. Number 5, and this is always helpful, refer to your leave behinds, which is why you want to kind of be familiar with the material. They'll ask questions like, well, how many people are affected? You're like, oh, you can see that in this document right here, but it's an estimated 1 to 2.5 million people in the United States, for example. So that's a really helpful way to kind of bring the leave behinds in the conversation. The more you refer to the leave behinds in the conversation, the more they'll actually look at them later. So that's a really positive tactic that I found very helpful. Well, of course, make eye contact, make a connection. I've actually, I'll share a personal story. There's been times when I've been like almost a little uncomfortable to like stare people straight in the eye and talk about some of the very difficult things that my family has been through as a result of ME/CFS, and I kind of feel uncomfortable doing it. But imagine how it makes them feel. You want them to make that connection, to feel your pain, to feel your story. And so that's a really great way to kind of directly incorporate them, especially, let's be clear, if some staffers are kind of zoned out, this is one of 17 meetings they've had today, and they're, they haven't had their coffee, they're not really into it, everybody has a bad day. And it's amazing how if you just really make eye contact and connect with that person, you can kind of switch them over and bring them back into the conversation and make sure it sticks. So that's a really positive one that I definitely want to emphasize. And then also number 7, don't be afraid to ask questions, especially, and I'm guilty of this as well, those of us who work in politics play the alphabet soup. We have 100 acronyms. So if they use a term you don't understand, if they use an acronym you don't understand, don't be afraid to say, can you explain what that means, or what are you referring to there? They're supposed to be the experts, not you, and they're supposed to be serving you. So don't be afraid to stop them when they're going off on some policy thing that sounds like another language, and say, hey, back that up. What do you mean by that? So I'm going to walk you through just really quickly a kind of sample outline for what a typical 20-minute meeting. This is kind of my go-to outline. You're free to make your own, but this is kind of how I've structured a lot of my conversations, and I found it to be pretty successful. So generally, you'll get about a 20-minute meeting. That's where you can expect, honestly, to have that much time with these folks. If it's a member of Congress, you might have a little less time. If it's a staff member, you might have a little more time, but 20 minutes is about par for where you can expect, or how long you can expect your meeting to last. So I usually take the first couple minutes to thank the person for the meeting, make small talk, make them feel comfortable. So that's about 2 minutes right there. And then introduce yourself and do the business card exchange. That's about 3 minutes. You don't go into your story quite so much there. You just say very quickly what your connection is to the disease. So for example, when I introduce myself, I say, hello, my name is Emily Taylor. I'm the Director of Advocacy and Communications for the Solve ME/CFS Initiative. My mother also suffers with this disease. That's it. That's as far as I go. And then I share my business card. So that, given that there's a couple people in the room, you want to be quick so everyone has the opportunity to introduce themselves. And one of the other things I find helpful is sometimes they'll just be like, oh, I'm a staffer. And you're like, oh, okay, ask them a little more, like, which areas do you cover? Do you cover health policy? Do you cover appropriations? Kind of probe a little bit to get a good sense of where you are in the office hierarchy, so you can tailor your conversation to be appropriate to that person. And this is kind of my go-to. I really have found this to be very successful. The next one, after you introduce yourselves, let's say, kind of they get to that moment where it's like, okay, now where do we go from here? Just ask, so are you familiar with ME/CFS, or do you know anybody with ME/CFS? And I found that is a really great opening conversation piece to initiate the conversation, because sometimes they'll be like, oh yes, my cousin was sick, oh wow, it was so terrible, and they could be like, oh my goodness, what happened to your cousin? And then you have that moment to like kind of connect, and or they say, I have no idea what you're talking about, and then it's a teachable moment. You can then tell them, oh, well, ME/CFS is this complex neurological autoimmune disease. We don't know much about it. It's had this history of underfunding, and then you can kind of use that opportunity to teach them about ME/CFS. And that's a great segue. It just kind of folds so nicely into telling your story. So take about 5 minutes, maybe a little longer if it's a larger group. Or if you're a larger group, you might want to designate one person to share their story and kind of get one person might be taking notes, one person might be, sharing the business cards, one person might be the kind of fact giving person, and then one person might share their story. So you might want to divvy up these roles amongst your group. And again, you'll get the opportunities to meet your group the night before, so you can kind of strategize about what you feel comfortable with. But I'd say keep the story if like 1 or 2 people, and try to keep it to like 5 minutes, 6 minutes tops. Because again, we only have 20 minutes, so you kind of really, all of this is pulling them into the last item, making the asks. And I always save that for last, because at a certain point, I've just noticed these conversations naturally come into, here's my experience, here's why it's frustrating, now here's what you can do about it. And that sort of is a natural progression. It feels very smooth in the nature of these meetings. So definitely make the asks, make them clear and concise, and be super transparent. Be like, this is what Congressman so-and-so can do to help our community today. And make it pointed, make it specific, and also make it time specific, like today or in the next 3 weeks or something like that, because we do want to be transparent in that we're going to come back to these offices in the future. We're not going away. So this is kind of the introductory part where we'd like to have them join our coalition, join our team, but we're going to come back and ask them again. So that's why that early part of the conversation, the first 15 minutes or so, is so important, because we want them to feel motivated to help on this issue. And even if they say, I can't help with this particular action today, I'm on this committee, it puts me in a conflict, like, I understand that, but we're going to come back again. So that's why I recommend, when you say the ask, this is what you can do to help us this year, this cycle, this committee session, this is what you can do to help us today. So now I'm going to get a little bit more into the details of what to expect in Washington, D.C. Now that you're all primed and ready with all that great information about how to tackle your meetings. So, we say it's ME/CFS Advocacy Week because there's a lot of activities going on. And when we said we were going bigger and bolder, last year I think we had 2 activities. We just had a training and then the Capitol Hill storm. This time we're going, as you can see by the schedule, way bigger. So on Saturday, May 12th, that's when it's the official day is ME/CFS International Awareness Day, and that's when the Millions Missing actions will be happening. And in Washington, D.C., there is an ME Action sponsored Millions Missing event, and it will be taking place from 12 p.m. to 2 p.m. at Freedom Plaza at the Pennsylvania Avenue side. You can get more information about that on the ME Action website. I'll also provide a link on our website as well. And just a quick note that I did get a request that the organizer is still looking for shoes for the display. So I'm going to add that to the website as well. If you have extra shoes that you'd like to send as part of the DC Visibility Action, I'll give you the information to send those along to the organizer. And then on Sunday, we have a really special treat. We're going to be doing an SMCI Mother's Day brunch as a way to just kind of get everyone together to say thank you to Carol Head and I will both be there. You can ask us questions about the work that SMCI is doing, both in research and in advocacy. So it'll be a really fun opportunity for everyone to get together, enjoy some brunch, and celebrate all of our wonderful mothers. At the same hotel where all of the other events will be taking place. That's the Hyatt Place at the U.S. Capitol. And then coming into Monday, we'll have an unrest watch party and discussion, again at the Hyatt Place Capitol for those who have the energy or not wiped out from Saturday. And then on Monday evening, this is one of the big events, is the SMCI Advocacy Day training. So I highly encourage you all to come. We'll be repeating some of the information I'm coming in this webinar, but also the asks that were finalized will be finalized, and we can talk about those. We can meet your groups and do some practice activities within your groups so you get comfortable to storm Capitol Hill the following day. There'll be some light refreshments available. I wouldn't say it's a full dinner, but enough to kind of nosh on. And also, of course, we'll be staying after. If you have further questions, you can always, I'll be there to just, you can just come right up and say hello and ask me whatever you'd like to know. And of course, Tuesday, May 15th is the big day. That's our Capitol Hill Storm Day. It'll be taking place basically all day from 8:30 in the morning till about 4 p.m. at night. There'll be a short break for lunch, which is because the staff generally don't take meetings at lunchtime, but sometimes they do. And so I'll have a follow-up slide where I go into the details of exactly the breakdown of that day. At the end of the day, for those of us who are not completely wiped out, there will be a reception, an CFS Advocacy Day Congressional reception in the Rayburn office building, and I'll show you a map so you can see where all that is. There'll be some light drinks, there'll be some light refreshments. We'll have special guests. The actress Amy Carlson will be speaking, Carol Head, our president, will be speaking, and Representative Bill Krakus from Florida will also be speaking, which is really exciting. So it's a real high, fun, social, and yet effective event for raising awareness about MECFS. And then lastly, as everybody's heading out the door, we'll have a quick farewell breakfast on Wednesday morning to say goodbye and if you connect with your new friends and before you hit the road back to home. So to break down a little bit about the details of what'll be happening specifically on Tuesday, May 15th, here's an outline of how you can expect the day to go. So from 7:30 to 8:30 a.m., we'll have breakfast. That will be at the Hyatt Place Hotel. For those who are staying in the hotel, your breakfast is complimentary. You can just pick it up and bring it into our private room. And for those who are not staying at the hotel, you can always join us. There'll be some additional food there as well, so for folks who aren't staying at the hotel to eat. From 8:30 to 9 a.m., you want to meet up with your groups, and we'll have a quick last-minute tutorial. I'll be there to answer any last-minute questions you have. And we'll just kind of get everyone together with your group so you're all coordinating, know where you're going, you know what you're doing, just to help get that smooth process. From 9 to 9:30, we'll have a shuttle that's just for us that'll be bringing folks from the hotel to the U.S. Capitol buildings. It'll have 2 stops on the Senate side and on the House side, depending on which side of the hill your meetings are first. And that we'll have 2 sessions going from 9 and then another one at 9:30. None of the meetings will start until 10 a.m. So except there's a couple exceptions, and I'll reach out to you individually with those details. So most of the meetings will start around 10 a.m. So from 9 to 9:30, the free shuttle bus will take you over. It's about a 10-minute drive, a little less than 10-minute drive from the hotel to the Capitol building. It's about if you wanted to walk it, I mean, I wouldn't walk it, but if you wanted to walk it, it's about a 15-minute walk. So from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m., that's when you'll be conducting your individual meetings with members of Congress and their staff with your groups. So each group will have its own schedule, and each individual will have your own schedule. So you'll follow your schedule, and we'll give you a map. You'll know where you're going, and you'll meet at each meeting for your individualized schedules. So for example, there's a sample schedule on the website if you want to look for Mr. John Doe, and Mr. John Doe has 4 meetings, and they take place between 10 a.m. and 3:30. And each meeting again is about 20 minutes, and that gives you, we try to put at least an hour between meetings to give you enough time to get from one place to the other. And we've also tried to schedule meetings as geographically close on the Capitol Hill as possible. So we tried to put, for example, if your 2 senators are in the Hart building, we tried to put those together so it makes it easy for you to logistically get around. And again, if you have any questions, they'll have maps. We have all of our cell phones. The Prime Advocacy team will be available to help you as well. If you're running late, you can call them and they can make adjustments. So we'll have all of those resources available for you throughout the day. Also to help you throughout the day, from 11 a.m. to 4 p.m., we'll have our base camp room with snacks and resting space. That room number is Cannon 122, and I'm going to show you a map in a second so you can see where that is in relation to everything else. The base camp room is our exclusive safe space. So if there's something that's too heavy, you don't want to carry it, you can leave it there and come back and get it later. If you just need to lay down for a bit, you can go there and lay down. This is our time, our space on Capitol Hill. Our staff will be there to help with logistics, and there'll be snacks and food. So it's a kind of a safe space that if you have an hour or so between meetings, you can go there and rest up before your next meeting. And then lastly, as I mentioned before, there's the Advocacy Day reception, which will be in the Rayburn House office building on the 2nd floor, and that'll take place between 4 and 6 p.m. for everybody who needs a glass of wine after a very long day. So next I'm going to show you the map to show you a little bit of where everything is and what to expect. So let me get my little pen here. So the Canon office building is this one right here. If you can see my little red dot circling, that is where our base camp room will be. Now you see these little orange lines, that's an underground tunnel that connects Canon to Longworth to Rayburn. These are the House office buildings. So these are for every member of Congress who's in the House of Representatives, this is where their offices will be. And as you can see, there's these little green and blue dots. Those are the entrances and exits that you can use. And which ones are open at 10 a.m. are the blue ones. And then the other ones are open earlier. This is where we'll probably spend a good chunk of the day. At this Rayburn office building is where the reception is. And this Cannon office building is where the base camp is. And then the Senate side is up here. These are the blue buildings up here, Dirksen, Hart, and Russell. Again, there's underground tunnels that connect them. So you see these these like orange lines are the underground tunnels that connect these two buildings. And these are, Hart especially is a very vertical building. So there's a lot of elevators. Russell's a bit, as you can see, it's a big square. So it's a bit more spread out with a bit more walking. If you can, when you get a sense of when you first arrive, I find it easier to just take that extra, even if you're running late, take that extra 5 minutes to like look at the map of the building so that you don't do any extra steps by getting lost in the circle in the maze of the building. It's pretty intuitive in terms of the numbering systems. So generally, like your packet will say Russell 222. So 2 means it's on the second floor, and then 22 is the office number. So when you get into the building, you'll look up, you'll want to take an elevator to the second floor, take a moment to look at the map and make sure you kind of take the least walking route to office number 22. So that's a sense of how Capitol Hill works. So up here, you'll see this little arrow to the Union Metro Station. For those who are metroing in on the Senate side, that's the closest metro. The Union Station Metro Center or Metro Station rather, is about halfway between the Capitol Hill and our hotel. So it's about maybe 4 or 5 blocks to Union Station from these blue office buildings. And then it's another 7 or 8 blocks north from there to the hotel. So if you wanted to walk it, again, it depends on how good your heels are and how comfortable you are and how many steps you can take. But it's about a 20-minute walk or so from the hotel straight to the Capitol Hill. And from the blue Senate side to the red House side, going along First Street or cutting here right along the Capitol building, that's about a 10-minute walk. So here's a couple just insights of safety and resources that I recommend when you're navigating Capitol Hill. Jaywalk at your own risk. Those cabbies are crazy. So even if it looks clear, I always wait for the traffic light, but if you feel braver than I do, go for it. If you are wiped out and you've hit your wall, please don't keep going. Please stop. If you're just done for the day, call us and we can squeeze in another advocate to accommodate your meetings. If you need to go back to the hotel because that's your day, then don't worry about it. We'll work around it. So please, your health comes first. If you're done, please be done. Just a kind of heads up, they've been a bit lax or more laxed about this lately, but they used to have a very strict policy of no food or beverages, even bottled water, through security. The last time I was there in March, they were a bit more flexible on this, but just to be safe, I'd recommend no food or beverage going through security. Once you're inside, you can have all the food and beverage you want, but it's just the process of going from outside to inside through security that they sometimes are a little twitchy about that. And if you have heavy items or items you don't want to carry, feel free to leave them at base camp. Base camp will always be supervised and your items will be safe there. Also, no matter what anyone tells you, sitting in the hallways is okay. If someone gives you a dirty look, that's their problem, not yours. You are 100% allowed to sit in the hallways. And so if you're outside of a meeting or you're waiting for your meeting, feel free to just sit down if you need to. And then the other kind of insider knowledge is that there are actually bathrooms on every floor. They're just not necessarily public. If you kind of hit a moment where you really need a bathroom, go to a nearby office and ask them, it's an emergency, I need to use the bathroom. And sometimes if they're nice, they'll give you a key. But there are actually bathrooms on every floor. Sometimes they'll tell you you need to go down like 3 flights of stairs or something to get to the nearest restroom. But as we know, that's not an option with a lot of our patients. So feel free and don't hesitate to just go to the closest office, ask them for the bathroom key if you need it, because I mean, we all have those needs, right? And worst comes to worst, if anything should happen, this is the phone number of the attending physician of Capitol Hill. There is a office of the attending physician that's located centrally in the Capitol. So if you're having some kind of a medical emergency or need immediate assistance on the health side, that's the phone number for the office of the attending physician. So that's all of the kind of insights I have for ME/CFS Advocacy Day. I focused a little bit more on the logistics of going to Capitol Hill because we had so many with us who are taking that journey with us. So I'm happy to open it up for questions at this point and see what I forgot to cover. So let's see, if you have a question, you can go ahead and raise your hand. And Sarah, were there any questions that were submitted in writing?
Yes, I'll read the first question. Will there be a shuttle between the House and Senate buildings? Asked by Natalie.
That's a great question. Thank you for that, Natalie. Unfortunately, this year we will not have a shuttle. We had a little trolley cart that helped us out last year, but nobody really used it. There's taxis available. It's about $8 to $10 for a taxi to shuttle from one side to the other if that's what you feel you need. But unfortunately, we do not have a shuttle between the sides of the hill this year.
Here is another question that came in the box from Laura. Will they have to buy their own snacks and water inside the buildings if security doesn't let theirs through?
That is a great question. Again, we will have snacks and water available at base camp, entirely for you to use. As I said, they've been better about allowing some of the stuff to go through security. So this is when you go in and out of a building, unless you're using the underground tunnel, you will need to go back through security. So this is really comes into play when you're transitioning from the House side to the Senate side. So you'll have to leave the Senate side in those underground tunnels, as I pointed out, and then go back through security. So if you're bringing food out of the House side where our base camp is, into the Senate side, they might make you throw it away, in which case, yeah, you would need to buy your own inside of there, but you can always come back to base camp and we'll have food and water available there.
Okay, and I would like to remind you that you can hit the raise your hand button and ask the question personally. You don't have to write it into the box, but from the box, the next question comes from Janet. And what is the policy on electronic devices?
That is a great question. What I experienced in my last trip to DC was they do ask you to take your laptop out of your bag and put it through separately when you're going through security, but you're allowed to bring all of your electronic devices into the office buildings. There is Wi-Fi. It's weak at best in some places, and it's often very slow because so many people are using it, but there is public Wi-Fi on Capitol Hill, and any of your iPads, cell phones, laptops are allowed into the buildings. And again, if they get too heavy for you to carry or they're kind of just, becoming a burden, you can always feel free to leave them at base camp.
Okay, the next question is how do the advocates get the information specific to their district?
Oh, that's a great question. There is a wonderful Google document that a volunteer prepared that includes the specific rate of prevalence of ME/CFS in your district and also the economic impact in your district. And I just realized I don't think the link to that is on the advocacy page. So I'm going to make a note to myself right now to add the link to the resource document, which breaks everything down by district, to the advocacy page. So I hopefully will have that up in a day or two on the advocacy website for you to look at.
Okay, Janet asks, what if the press asks what's going on?
Ooh, that's a great question. So we are doing a press outreach effort. The details of that are still coming together, but we are trying to get as much media attention, both for Millions Missing and for ME/CFS Advocacy Day as possible. And if you do happen to run into a member of the press who asks what's going on, tell them, please, by all means, tell them about ME/CFS, tell them about the hundreds of sick patients who are coming to Capitol Hill to make sure their voices are heard, and the sacrifice that entails. Tell them your story about what you had to go through to get to Washington, D.C., and what your family has experienced with this disease. Absolutely, I'd say there's nothing that we're doing that there's any reason the press shouldn't know about. In fact, we encourage them to know about. The only thing I'll offer as caution is if you're sensitive about your name or image being used, make sure to tell the press person that before you start talking to them. So for example, I know there are patients that have difficulties with disability or in the process of fighting a disability claim, and so media coverage that includes you on Capitol Hill could potentially damage your case. So if you want to speak off the record to them, just make sure you tell them that. Otherwise, they will use your name and potentially your picture. So just be aware that if what that does for your personal life if you end up in the paper, or maybe you really want to be in the paper and you have some amazing things to put on your fridge back at home when you clip it out. But that's the only caution I would give. Otherwise, everything that we're doing is the more media attention, the better.
Okay, Laura asks, can we take photos with permission of meeting members and use hashtags to gain awareness?
Absolutely, I love it. I love it. So some of the offices are a little twitchy. I'll use that word, a little twitchy about taking cell phone pictures inside the office. Always ask for permission if you're taking a picture inside a member's office. If you're in the hallways or a public space outside of the member's office, take pictures as much as you want. But inside the office, I would highly recommend asking for permission. If you're meeting with the member themselves, they will usually encourage you to take pictures in there because they love the visibility. Sometimes they will ask or specifically instruct you to allow their office photographer to take the photo, and rather than using your cell phone camera. And then they'll email you the photos later. So it kind of depends on each office has their own protocols, but I definitely recommend and encourage you to ask inside the offices, and please share them with us as well. We'd love to put those in our newsletter, and the more the better.
Would you also like to share our hashtag with them again?
Oh, yes. So we'll have all that on the website. We're still kind of generating the hashtags. And again, as I mentioned before, we're collaborating with Emmy Action on that. So there will be some universal social media posts going out.
Okay, Bobby asked about what about wheelchairs and getting inside doors and bathrooms?
Also an excellent question. These are public offices, and so everything is ADA accessible on Capitol Hill. Let me just go back real quickly to the map, and I can show you a couple of tips and tricks for navigating handicap areas. Let's see, can you see my little laser pointer there? A little red dot. So this area here, coming down First Street, is handicap accessible. These little drop-down areas have a bit of a ramp. This area right here and this area right here in the middle, that's all goes to the Capitol Visitor Center. So I would avoid these three middle corridors right here with a wheelchair. It's a steep incline and it's not very fun. However, if you go these wider areas, so this one right here across to the Capitol building, or this guy right here, the outside ramps, they do have a less of an incline to them, and it's a good shortcut to cut through, especially if you're coming to Longworth or Rayborn. So you can kind of take this diagonal track following the laser pointer down through Capitol, and then through the outside ramp, and then straight into Russell and Dirksen. I do have another map. I didn't use it because it's a little harder to read, but I will post it online, which specifically demonstrates which of these blue dots that are the entrances and exits, which one of them are handicap accessible and not. So I will share that on the website as well.
Okay, Janet asked what about getting controlled medications through security? Would they have a problem with that?
That's an interesting point. I'd have to go look into that. I've never had an issue with bringing medications as long as they're in a properly labeled container into or out of security. I've never seen that happen before, but that's a good question. I'll have to look into that and get back to you.
Okay, Natalie asked that we recommended sharing hotel rooms with other advocates to cut down costs. Is there any way that we can help match them up?
Oh, interesting. So if you have or are looking for a roommate, how about the best way to go about it would probably be to email me, and then I'd be happy to, with your permission, I never share an email address without permission, connect you to other folks who are looking for roomies.
Okay, Beverly asked if it would be possible to get a list of the members of Congress that they're meeting with in advance so they can do some research on them.
That's a great question. Yes. So I can send out a list of the folks who we've requested meetings with. We probably won't have finalized meeting schedules until, to be honest, just a couple days before the event. Last year we were literally shuffling meetings the morning of as congressional members were changing on us, changing our schedules like in the middle of the event. So in terms of a finalized schedule, I probably won't have that until very close to the event, but I can definitely send out a list of folks that we've made requests on your behalf.
Well, that looks like it's all the questions from the box. Does anyone else have any last minute questions?
I don't see any hands raised, so I think great. I'm so glad to have answered all of your questions. And of course, if you have any further questions or you have anything else that you just didn't feel comfortable sharing here on the webinar, feel free to email me directly. I'm happy to respond. My email again is etaylor, ETAYLOR @solvecfs.org. And I'd be happy to connect you. As Beverly asked, if there's folks that are looking for roommates, to send me an email flagging that you're looking for a roommate, and if I'll find somebody else who sends me the same email, I'll put you two together. Or if you have any other items that you're specifically looking for, if you want to know something specific about the districts or about the meetings, feel free to message me. Again, I just want to direct you to the Solve MECFS website. solvemecfs.org or solvecfs.org, and any of the advocacy buttons will take you to the full list of items on Advocacy Day, and that'll be kind of our central information hub. So if there's, I'll put some of these questions that we've gotten today, I'll add them to the FAQ. I'll add those links, especially the image to handicap accessibility entrances, and anything else, I will add them. I add that information to the website, so that'll be our central hub for where to go to for information. And with that, I want to thank everybody so much for joining us in Washington, D.C. I look forward to meeting all of you. And for those of you I've met already before, I look forward to seeing you again. And I'm really enthusiastic. I haven't said this before, but we actually have 115 folks registered to join us on Capitol Hill, which is huge. So it's going to be the biggest advocacy day ever, the biggest storm on Capitol Hill for MECFS ever. And I can't be happier to be leading this with all of you. So thank you again. Feel free to reach out, and we'll see you in Washington, D.C. in just a couple of weeks.